She was only 16, and that roadside motel room was the only place in town that didn't ask questions. The neon sign flickered like a broken heartbeat. Sunset Inn. Vacancy. One of those motels with thin walls, scratchy sheets, and a silence that carries more sorrow than comfort. She stepped inside with the kind of care only a girl carrying more than her own weight knows how to do. A battered backpack slung over one shoulder, and the other hand cradling the curve of her belly. 7 months along, maybe more. The man behind the front desk didn't look at her face, didn't need to. He just slid over the key like he'd done for dozens of other girls with nowhere else to go. Inside, the room smelled like stale smoke and forgotten nights. But it had a bed and a door that locked. That was enough. She sat on the edge of the mattress, exhaling as if she'd been holding her breath for a lifetime. Her name was Emily, though lately she didn't say it out loud much, as if names were for people who belonged somewhere. She'd grown up slipping through the cracks, a daughter of a teenage mother who disappeared before Emily could walk, and a grandmother who left this earth when Emily was only 12. Since then, she'd lived in homes that weren't hers, been shuffled through schools that never remembered her name, and collected more bruises than birthdays. Now she was 16, with no family, no steady address, and a baby coming, whether she was ready or not. And yet, in the hush of that cheap motel room, there was a sound, gentle, rhythmic, the tiny thump of a baby's foot pressing from inside her. Like a whisper, "I'm still here." She smiled barely, then pulled a worn baby blanket from her bag, soft, pale yellow, the only thing she'd bought brand new from a thrift store down the road. She folded it carefully on the pillow beside her. That night, she didn't sleep much, but she wasn't entirely alone. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, across winding roads and iron gates, a man stood at a window too large for any one person. Richard Whitmore, 58 years old, a man with more money than he could count, and less joy than a beggar on the street. They called him the silent billionaire. Never married, no children, no scandals, just nothing. His mansion, perched on a hill, was spotless and echoing, the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But when the front door closed, it was quiet enough to hear your own regrets. That morning, Richard did what he often did, sat down to his black coffee, untouched toast, and skimmed through the business section. And when the maid knocked, a small girl, barely older than 20, nervous and quiet, he noticed the smear of something on the edge of the countertop. "You missed a spot," he said flatly. She apologized, hands trembling. She was new, late twice that week, clothes too worn. He didn't ask her name, just waved her away. "You're done here." And just like that, she was gone. He didn't think of her again, not for 2 weeks. It was a gray morning when he opened his front door to fetch the paper. One of those silly rituals he kept even though everything else was digital. And that's when he saw it, a baby carrier, right on his marble doorstep. Inside, wrapped in a thin cotton blanket, was a newborn, eyes shut tight, tiny hands curled like seashells. Pinned to the handle was a piece of notebook paper, torn edges, ink smudged from tears. "His name is Noah. Please take care of him. He didn't ask for any of this." "Emily." He stared at the baby, and the baby, as if sensing something, let out a soft whimper, not a full cry, more like a question. Richard froze. The man who negotiated billion-dollar deals with a single sentence didn't know how to lift a baby from a basket. And yet, as a cold wind blew across his doorstep, he reached down, almost without realizing, touched the corner of the blanket, and something inside his chest, long buried and forgotten, moved. If you've ever felt like the world gave up on someone too soon, then come sit with me, sugar. This is a story about a child left behind, a woman who loved in silence, and a second cradle waiting where no one thought to look. Richard stood at the kitchen counter, eyes fixed on a bottle he didn't know how to fill. He had always believed problems could be solved with money. You write a check, someone else handles the mess. But babies don't care about net worth. They cry because they're hungry, because they're cold, because their world, small as it is, suddenly feels too big. He'd called the number on the note. There wasn't one. He'd checked security cameras. They caught nothing but a blurry silhouette in the early dawn, slipping past the hedges. He thought about calling child services. He even picked up the phone. But then Noah, that was the name she gave, wrapped his tiny fingers around Richard's pinky. And the man who had never been called Dad by anyone felt something anchor him to the present. He'd once had a brother. You wouldn't know it, the way Richard talked, or didn't talk, about family. His little brother Samuel had died when they were kids. Pneumonia, back when their parents were still clawing their way out of poverty. Richard remembered holding Sam's hand in the hospital and promising that he'd never let anything hurt him again. He had failed that promise, and somewhere between Wall Street and these mansion walls, he stopped making promises altogether. But now, this child, abandoned yet breathing, was in his care. He did the clumsiest things, spilled formula, bought 5 kinds of diapers, none of which were the right size, Googled how to burp a baby at 2 a.m. with spit up on his silk pajama top. But Noah watched him, big brown eyes, the kind that looked too old for someone so new to the world. He didn't cry much, only when the silence felt too deep, and Richard found himself, without meaning to, humming lullabies he didn't even remember learning. The nursery in his house had never been used. It was built long ago, just in case, a room filled with untouched teddy bears and dust-covered mobiles. Now he stood in the doorway holding Noah, and something about the smell of warm milk, the weight of the baby against his chest, the creak of the old wooden floor, made his heart ache. Meanwhile, at the Sunset Inn, Room 7 had been silent for 3 days. The housekeeper knocked once. No answer. She used her master key. The bed was stripped, the bathroom spotless. But on the edge of the desk sat a folded letter, scrawled across the front in soft blue ink. "If anyone asks, tell them I had no choice." And on the pillow, a single baby sock. It was that night as Richard walked Noah up and down the hallway, his shirt wet with tears that weren't all the baby's, that someone rang the bell at the gate. Not the front door, the gate. He looked through the monitor, paused, and felt his chest tighten. There, soaked from the rain, was the girl he had fired 2 weeks ago. Hair limp, face pale, hands shaking, and in her eyes, not shame, not anger, but something much heavier. Grief. What could drive a young mother to leave her child on a stranger's doorstep? And what was she doing here now, empty-handed as the storm rolled in? She didn't knock. She just stood there, drenched, trembling, small. Richard watched her through the monitor for a long moment, not because he didn't recognize her. He did, but because something in her eyes reminded him of a window long boarded up inside himself. He pressed the gate buzzer. The iron doors creaked open. Emily stepped forward, arms wrapped around herself, as if the wind might peel her apart if she didn't hold tight. Her shoes were soaked through. Her lips cracked. She hadn't come to take anything. You could tell by the way she walked, slow, like someone who expected nothing good to come of this. When Richard opened the front door, he said nothing at first. He just looked at her, the same way you look at an old photo you're not ready to remember. "I wasn't going to," she whispered. He blinked. "Wasn't going to what?" "Come back." Her voice cracked on the last word. I needed to know if he was okay." And that's when the baby cried from upstairs. Not loud, just a wail in the quiet. But it broke her in half. Emily's knees gave out. She sank right there on the marble floor, arms over her stomach, sobbing. Not the kind of cry that wants sympathy, the kind that's been dammed up for too long, and finally floods. Richard didn't touch her. He didn't know how. Instead, he sat beside her, not saying a word, just being there. That's how healing sometimes begins, not with grand speeches, just with presence. Later, wrapped in one of the house's thick towels, Emily sat on the couch, steam from a chamomile tea rising in her hands. "I didn't mean to leave him like that," she said, her eyes fixed on the cup. I thought maybe someone like you could give him something I couldn't." "And what's that?" Richard asked. She looked up. "Everything." The fire crackled. Noah slept upstairs, full-bellied, his breathing soft. Richard didn't tell her she was wrong, didn't lecture her on abandonment or responsibility or law, because the truth was, He didn't know what he would have done at 16, with no one to turn to, a baby in his belly, and the weight of the world pressing down. "I was scared," she whispered. "Still am." He nodded. "I know something about fear." She turned toward him. "You don't look like someone who's ever had to be afraid." He gave a short laugh, not cruel, just tired. "Money doesn't erase fear, Emily. Sometimes it just puts better curtains around it." It was nearly midnight when he offered her a guest room. "Just for the night," he said. "You need rest. We'll talk tomorrow." She hesitated. "I don't want to confuse him," she said, meaning the baby. "I left. I don't want him thinking." Richard leaned forward, voice low. "He won't remember this night, but maybe he'll feel it, that someone came back." Emily's eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't fall. Upstairs, before she went to bed, she asked softly, "Can I see him?" Richard led her to the nursery. Noah was still asleep, a faint smile playing on his lips. Emily reached down, brushing one finger across his cheek, and something shifted in her chest. A pain, but not the sharp kind, the kind that lets you know you're still alive. That night, she dreamed of a house with windows open to the breeze, her baby's laughter echoing down the hallway, and her own hands, steady, strong, holding something that didn't slip away. But when she woke, the crib was empty, and the guest room door was locked from the outside. Was it protection, or had Richard made a decision without her? Emily sat up fast, heartbeat rattling her ribs. The room was bright with morning sun, but something was wrong. The doorknob didn't turn. She rattled it harder. Nothing. "Hello?" she called out, voice cracking. "Mr. Whitmore?" No answer. She stepped back, mind spinning. Was this punishment? Custody? Revenge? No. She shook her head. That man didn't seem cruel. Just careful. But still, it hurt. After everything, being shut away again made her feel small, powerless. Like all the times she'd been shuffled between foster homes and told to stay out of sight. Downstairs, Richard was pacing the kitchen. He'd asked his assistant to call a lawyer, just to understand what rights he had, what rights she had. But the lawyer had asked a simple question first. Do you want to keep the baby, or do you want to help the mother of him? Richard hadn't answered. Not yet. He poured coffee he didn't drink, stared at Noah's bottle on the counter, listened to the sound of tiny feet thumping the crib upstairs. Then he remembered the look on Emily's face the night before. That ache, that love. He set the cup down, went to the staircase. Emily was curled on the bed when he opened the door, eyes red, lips tight. "I didn't know it locked automatically," he said. "I'm sorry." She didn't answer right away. Then, "Do you want to keep him?" He stood there, a man unarmed. No briefcase, no answer. "I don't know," he said. "I know I want him safe, and I want you." "Okay." She looked at him, voice trembling. "I was okay, until I wasn't." And there it was, the whole truth in one line. Richard sat in the doorway. "Tell me," he said gently. "Tell me when it started to fall apart." So she did. She told him about the baby's father, a boy with charming eyes and cowardly hands, about the couch she slept on until she couldn't anymore, about hunger, about fear, about how her only steady place had been cleaning houses for strangers. "Your house," she whispered. "It felt safe, even if I was invisible in it." Richard bowed his head. And then he said something she didn't expect. "You were never invisible, Emily. I just didn't know how to see." The next few days were slow and strange. They moved around each other, cautiously, like survivors in the same lifeboat. Emily fed Noah in the mornings. Richard read to him at night. And somewhere between burp cloths and baby coos, they stopped speaking like strangers. She showed him how to hold the baby just right. He taught her how to cook eggs that didn't come from a motel microwave. They didn't talk about forever, just about tomorrow. But on the fourth night, Emily found something in the mailbox. A letter, with her name on it, in her own handwriting, only she never wrote it. She opened it slowly. Inside was a birth certificate, filed, stamped, father. Richard Whitmore. She stared at it, breath stolen. And at the bottom, a note. "This is what he needs. I'll disappear. Just let him have a real life." No signature. But she knew that handwriting. It was her own. Only she didn't remember writing it. Was someone trying to make her vanish? And if so, who had access to her past? Emily sat frozen on the front steps, the paper trembling in her hands. Her name, her handwriting, her baby's birth certificate, filed without her knowing. It was impossible. But there it was, stamped and legal. Her son, Noah Whitmore. Father listed, Richard Whitmore. Mother, Emily Grace Holloway. And yet, she hadn't signed anything. The air around her felt thinner, like someone had pulled the sky a little farther away. She stood slowly, walked inside, and found Richard in the study. He looked up from his laptop, a bit surprised by the storm in her face. "I need to show you something," she said. She handed him the letter. He read it, twice, then looked up with something unfamiliar in his eyes. Fear. "Emily, I didn't do this," he said quietly. "I've never seen this before." "But it's filed," she whispered. "It's real." "And I didn't do it." A long silence hung between them. The baby cried upstairs, but neither moved. Not yet. Then Richard rose. "I'm calling someone. A private attorney. Someone I trust." He walked toward the kitchen. Emily followed, arms wrapped around herself. "Why would someone do this?" she asked. "Why make it look like I gave him up? Why now?" Richard was already dialing. But in the silence before the ring, he muttered something under his breath. "What?" she asked. He looked at her. "My name. It protects people, but it also paints a target." They found out within the hour. Someone from his staff, someone quiet and forgettable, had requested the birth certificate using forged documents. A woman, late 20s, worked in the administrative wing for 6 months. Gone now. Left the job 2 days ago. No forwarding address. Her name didn't ring a bell for Richard, but when the assistant showed Emily a photo, her knees buckled. That was the social worker from her last shelter, the one who said she'd handle the paperwork for prenatal care, the one who'd taken her ID and made copies, just in case. Emily covered her mouth. "She stole my identity," she whispered. "She gave him away on paper, before he was even born." That night, after Noah fell asleep, Richard sat with Emily in the nursery. No music, no fire, just the soft ticking of a mobile above the crib. "Do you want to fight this?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I don't want him taken again. That's all I want." Richard nodded. "Then we'll fight." There was something strange about that word. We. She hadn't had a we in years. Maybe never. The next morning she found something on the dining room table. A file, neatly clipped. Legal notes. Custody protections. Identity verification documents. And on top, a post-it with a note in Richard's handwriting. "He's yours first. Always." She pressed the note to her chest, closed her eyes, and cried. But safety is a fragile thing, and it only takes one phone call to shake it all loose again. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Emily opened it. A woman in a charcoal gray suit stood on the porch, sharp heels, clipboard in hand. "Emily Holloway?" the woman asked, as if she didn't already know. "Yes," Emily replied, heart tightening. "I'm from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous report that the child in this home may be in danger." Emily's throat went dry. "Danger? I'm going to need to see the child and speak with both guardians." But the real chill came when Emily looked at the clipboard and saw the name of the person who'd filed the report. Lena Carver. The same social worker. The same ghost. Some ghosts don't stay gone. And some wounds don't close quietly. Richard didn't raise his voice, didn't demand, didn't threaten. He invited the CPS worker into the living room, asked if she wanted tea, carried Noah himself, resting the baby gently in her arms like a peace offering. Emily stood behind him, barely breathing. The woman, Ms. Travis, her name was, looked professional, but not unkind. She examined the baby, asked polite questions, and glanced around the immaculate home. "This is certainly more comfortable than the average case," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard. "But comfort," she added, "isn't the same as stability." She looked straight at Emily. "Have you lived here for more than 6 months?" Emily swallowed. "No, just a few weeks." "Are you employed?" "No, not since I had him." "Do you have any support outside this house?" Emily shook her head slowly, then whispered, "Not really." Ms. Travis wrote something down. The sound of her pen against paper felt louder than thunder. After she left, Emily sat on the floor in Noah's room, not crying, not speaking, just staring at the crib. "I'm losing him," she said softly. Richard sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "You're not," he said. "I am," she repeated. "They'll say I'm unstable, that I'm homeless, that I abandoned him." She turned to him, eyes wide and wet. "They won't care why." Later that night, Richard opened a drawer in his office, pulled out a box. Inside, letters, old, yellowing, from his brother, from his mother, from a life before everything got quiet. He'd buried them for years. Now, he needed to remember what it felt like to fight for something that couldn't be bought. He found a photo, one he hadn't looked at in decades. It was of his mother, holding him on one hip and Samuel on the other. She was smiling. They all were. He placed the photo on the mantel. That was the first time Emily saw him cry. The next morning he handed her a small envelope. "What is it?" she asked. "Your name," he said. "Back on every form, every file. I had the lawyer fix it. We can fight for shared custody, or sole custody, whatever you want." She opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized letter. "I, Richard Whitmore, acknowledge that I have no legal right to claim sole guardianship of Noah Holloway without the mother's full consent. My role in this child's life is, and always will be, secondary to hers." Emily read it 3 times, then looked up at him. "You'd really give him up?" she asked. His eyes were steady. "If that's what it takes for him to have peace." "Yes." She covered her face with her hands, and for the first time, let herself believe that she was not alone. But just as the calm settled in, the phone rang. It was Ms. Travis. She spoke quickly, voice sharp. "I just received a second report. The caller says the mother is planning to flee the country with the child." Emily looked at Richard, heart pounding. I would never." He took the phone. "Where did this report come from?" Ms. Travis hesitated. Then she said one word that turned Emily's world to ice. "Airport." Emily hadn't been near an airport, but someone had used her name, her ID, her face, and now the system was closing in. The hardest part about losing control of your own life is when the world believes you gave it away. Emily stood in the hallway, her back against the wall, phone pressed to her chest. She could still hear the woman's voice echoing in her ears. "We have a report that you attempted to flee the country with the child. If this is confirmed, we may have to initiate emergency removal." Emergency removal. 2 words that never feel like just policy when they land on a mother's doorstep. She looked at Richard, panic rising. "They'll take him." "No," he said firmly, already reaching for his keys. "We'll fix this." "But how?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I haven't even left the house. I haven't even held my own ID in weeks." He turned to her, eyes calm. "Then we prove it." They drove in silence to the lawyer's office, a quiet room with walls lined with books and a woman behind the desk who didn't blink. When she saw the emergency stamped across their faces, Richard explained everything. The forged birth certificate, the anonymous reports, the airport claim, and Emily just sat there, hollow-eyed, rocking gently in the chair. When she finished her part, the lawyer leaned back slowly and said, "You're not dealing with a system error. You're dealing with someone who wants to erase you," Emily whispered. "But why? I'm no one." The lawyer shook her head. "You're his mother. That's everything." They went back home with a plan. Security footage was pulled, bank transactions tracked, phone records requested. They needed proof, not just that she was innocent, but that someone else was behind the curtain. And in the middle of it all, Noah still needed bottles, still needed lullabies, still cried at 3 a.m., still smiled like the world hadn't betrayed his mother yet. It was in the 3rd drawer of the nursery dresser that Emily found something strange. She hadn't opened that drawer before, didn't even remember packing it. But inside was a passport, her passport, only it wasn't hers, not completely. The photo looked like her. The name was hers, but the issue date? 2 weeks ago. She picked it up with trembling hands, flipped through the pages, and found the stamp, one-way ticket to Amsterdam, dated for the next morning. She sank to the floor, heart thudding. "That night," she told Richard, "I didn't apply for this. I didn't even know it existed." He took the passport gently, studied it. "It's not just about you," he said. "Someone is trying to show that you're unstable, that you're a risk." "But why?" she asked again. "Why go through all this?" Richard hesitated. And then he spoke words he hadn't planned to say out loud. "Because I'm worth a fortune, and someone knows that if you're out of the picture, there's no one left to question me raising Noah or putting his name on my estate." Emily blinked. She hadn't thought of that. "Someone's trying to make you look like the villain," he said gently. "So I'll become the hero." She stared down at the fake passport in her lap. "I don't want your money." He smiled softly. "I know. That's why I trust you. But trust alone doesn't stop the tide." The next morning, 2 officers knocked on the door. Formal, cold, professional. "We have a court order," one said. "The child must be temporarily placed in state care until the investigation is complete." Emily dropped the baby bottle in her hands. "No, please. He's breastfeeding. He still wakes. They didn't look at her, just extended their arms toward Noah. Richard stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "You'll have to go through me." They read him the order again. He clenched his jaw, eyes wet with fury. But in the end, he stepped aside. They took Noah, wrapped him in a blanket, carried him down the steps of the estate, and drove away. No sirens, no shouting, just the quiet theft of everything that mattered. Emily collapsed in Richard's arms, her whole body shaking. She whispered something over and over, so quiet, you almost couldn't hear. "I should have just disappeared." But she didn't know what was waiting for her in the mail the next morning. A letter, no return address. Inside, a photo of Lena Carver, the fake social worker, standing at a restaurant table. Across from her, a man Emily didn't recognize, but Richard did. It was his cousin, the one who'd been quietly circling the will since last winter. Sometimes the people trying to save you are the ones being hunted too. There are betrayals so quiet, you don't hear them until the glass is already shattered. And then, all you can do is kneel and pick the pieces with your bare hands. The photo shook in Richard's fingers, not because it surprised him, but because deep down, he'd known. Somewhere under the surface of silence and polite family dinners, he'd known. The man sitting across from Lena Carver, the false social worker, was Elliot Whitmore, Richard's cousin. Same bloodline, same last name, but not the same heart. Elliot had always been polite, present, harmless, the kind of man who smiled without warmth, asked about your health without waiting for an answer, and showed up at funerals just long enough to be noticed. But when Richard's health scare came last fall, just a whisper of something on a scan, nothing confirmed, Elliot began appearing more often, subtle, offering help, asking questions, nudging conversations toward Richard's will. Now it made sense. Why Elliot would pay a woman to erase a girl's rights. Why he'd try to place a child where no one would ask why he was suddenly the legal guardian after Richard passed. Because when there's a child with the Whitmore name, that child stands between a greedy man and an empire. Emily sat across from him in the study, holding the photo. "I don't even know him," she whispered. "But he knows you," Richard said. "And he's counting on your fear to do the rest." She looked down. Her fingers clenched the edge of the image until it curled like paper, left too close to a flame. "Then let's stop being afraid," she said. They met with the attorney again. Then a second one outside of Richard's usual circle. Richard rewrote his will, stripped Elliot from everything, added protections, clauses, sealed guardianship contingencies. But most importantly, he placed Noah under co-guardianship. "In the event of incapacitation or death," the paper read, "custody of Noah Holloway shall pass to Emily Holloway or a court-appointed guardian of her choosing. No relative of Richard Whitmore shall have legal or physical custody." When Emily read it, she didn't cry. She just looked up at him, eyes soft and tired. "I don't need your fortune," she said. He shook his head. "No, sweetheart, but I need you to know that you matter. That he's yours, not because you carried him, but because you stayed, even when you were alone." They took the document to court, filed an emergency petition, presented the forged passport, the surveillance photos, the evidence of conspiracy, and slowly, the tide turned. Miss Travis from CPS came to their home again. This time, she didn't sit stiffly. She walked through the nursery, touched the edges of the crib, then turned to Emily and said gently, "He's coming back to you. I'm recommending full reinstatement." Emily blinked. "You believe me now?" Miss Travis nodded. "I believed you before, but I had to prove it to the ones who don't." That night they waited. They didn't know what hour the knock would come, only that it would. Richard made tea. Emily folded a small blanket over the arm of the couch. Neither spoke. Then, just after midnight, a soft knock. Emily opened the door, and there he was, wrapped in a brown CPS-issued coat, cheeks flushed from sleep. His tiny body smelled like someone else's home, but his arms reached for hers like he never left. "Noah," she whispered. She held him tight, kissed the top of his head, rocked him with tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Richard watched from the hallway, one hand pressed to his heart. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. They took turns holding the baby, breathing him in, watching the rise and fall of his chest like it was the only clock that mattered anymore. "And somewhere near dawn," Emily whispered. "Why did you really let me stay that first night?" Richard turned toward her, eyes glassy in the dim light. "Because you were the first person in a long, long time who didn't want anything from me." He looked down at Noah. "Except maybe this," he said softly. "A second chance." But second chances aren't always safe from second storms. Because 2 days later a new letter arrived. It wasn't from Elliot, wasn't from CPS, wasn't even from a lawyer. It was from a name Emily hadn't seen in years, one she didn't speak aloud anymore. Her mother. And the first line? "I know where you are, and I want to see my grandson." The past doesn't always stay buried, my love. Sometimes it comes knocking with blood on its hands and a smile on its lips. The envelope was plain. No return address, no logo, just her name, written in a hand she hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. Emily Grace Holloway, COO Richard Whitmore. It was the kind of handwriting that once scrawled lunchbox notes and promises on torn paper, then vanished without saying goodbye. She sat at the kitchen table while Richard put Noah down for his nap. The baby's mobile spun slowly overhead, unaware of the thunder gathering downstairs. Emily stared at the letter for nearly an hour before opening it. The paper was thin, the kind that folds too easily, and the words were heavy. "Emily, I heard about the baby. I have no idea what lies you've been telling people, but I have every right to see my grandson. You know what I gave up. You know why I had to leave. I want to meet him. I deserve that. No apology, no warmth, no explanation, just expectation." She read the letter again, slower this time, and with each line the past came rushing back. Her mother, Rachel, had been just 17 when she had Emily, and by the time Emily turned 7, the roles had already reversed. It was Emily who cleaned up the glass, Emily who packed the bags, Emily who sat quietly on the porch, while her mother chased freedom from one man to the next. The last time she saw her, Rachel had thrown a suitcase into a car without turning back. No goodbye, no kiss, just a cloud of dust on the dirt road. And now, after all this time, after silence, after pain, she wanted in. Richard returned to find Emily folded over the letter. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but with something colder. Control. "She doesn't want me," she said. "She just wants to be near what I made." Richard took the letter, read it quietly. "She can't take him," he said. Emily looked up. "She took me," she whispered. The next few days were a storm with no lightning. Richard contacted the lawyer again. Restraining order? Possibly. Document everything? Absolutely. But fear is a tricky thing. It doesn't wait for court dates. It visits you in the quiet. It sneaks into the nursery. It whispers, "What if she shows up before you're ready?" So Emily did something she hadn't done in years. She wrote back, "Rachel, you left. I survived. Noah isn't your redemption. He's my son. You will not come near him. If you try, we will take every legal measure to protect him. Emily." She didn't sign it. Love. Didn't ask why. She just mailed it. That night, after Noah fell asleep, she sat on the porch with Richard. "I hate that she knows where I am," Emily said. He nodded slowly. "I hate that she has your name," he replied. They sat in the silence together, the kind that comes only after shared grief, and somewhere between the stars and the wind, Richard reached out, not for her hand, but for her pain. "I won't let her take anything else from you," he said. She didn't answer, but she leaned closer. The next morning, the police were at the gate. "Do you know a Rachel Holloway?" the officer asked. Emily froze. "Yes," she said. "She was picked up at a motel downtown last night," he said. "Under the influence. Kept repeating your name. Something about a baby." He handed Richard a card. "If she shows up here, call us. We flagged the address for her safety. And yours." And then he added something Emily would never forget. She had a photo of your son in her pocket. The house felt quieter than usual, not because of fear, but because the weight of memory was settling in. Emily moved slowly through the nursery that afternoon, running her fingers across the edge of the crib, the stack of folded onesies, the worn copy of Goodnight Moon on the shelf. She thought about what kind of mother she wanted to be, not the kind she came from, but one who stayed, one who learned. She whispered to Noah, asleep in his wrap, "You won't have to forget to survive. You won't have to wonder if you were wanted." Richard was different too. He'd always moved with purpose, meetings, calls, files, but now he paused more often, stopped in doorways, sat longer beside the crib, and that evening he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened the piano. The music was clumsy at first, old fingers on older keys, but Emily stood in the hallway and listened like she was hearing a secret. He played a lullaby, not for her, not for himself, but for the house, for the baby, for the silence that needed filling. Later that night, she found him in the kitchen, drying bottles, humming the tune. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "My mother," he said. "She used to play it when Sam couldn't sleep." "Sam, my brother." She nodded, waiting. "He died when we were kids. I think a part of me did too." Emily stepped closer. "You never talk about him." "I didn't want to break," he said. She touched his arm. "You can break here." And for the first time since she'd met him, Richard's shoulders shook, quiet, contained, but real. Tears for the brother he lost, for the family that never was, for the boy who promised to protect someone and didn't. Emily made tea. They sat on the floor. No words, just grief braided with comfort. And after a while, she whispered, "I think we've both lived in empty cradles." He nodded. "Maybe it's time we filled one together." The next morning, Emily called the shelter where she'd last stayed, the one Lena Carver had worked through. She asked to speak to the director. After some back and forth, they found a record, a logbook. Lena had used another name, a fake one. She'd worked under it for 8 months, and then disappeared. But the director said something curious. "She came with a baby once," she said. "Not hers. She said it was a placement visit. The child didn't have paperwork, though. It wasn't reported." Emily's breath caught. "A baby?" The director hesitated. "Girl, maybe 4 months old. Real quiet. Looked like she hadn't been held in a while." Emily stared out the window. It wasn't just about Noah. It never was. What if Lena had done this before? And what if there was another child out there with no name, no voice, and no mother left to fight? Emily turned to Richard. "I need to find that baby." He blinked. "Why?" And she answered with something he understood in his bones. "Because no one looked for me, and I survived." But maybe she doesn't have to just survive. Some cradles aren't empty. They're just waiting for someone brave enough to reach in. The shelter hadn't changed much. Same peeling paint on the side wall. Same smell of overcooked pasta and broken promises. Emily stood at the front desk, holding a photo of Noah in her hand. Not because she needed to show it, but because she needed courage. She hadn't been back since the pregnancy test came up positive in the bathroom stall. Since Lena said, "Don't worry, I'll help." A woman named Delia greeted her. Older, soft-eyed, the kind who carried too many stories in her gaze. "I remember you," Delia said. "And I remember Lena too. She was trouble in nice shoes." Emily nodded. "I'm looking for the baby." Delia's smile faded. "She didn't leave anything behind," she said. "No paperwork, no files, but she did come in here, twice, with that child. Wouldn't let anyone hold her." Emily leaned forward. "Did she call her by name?" Delia closed her eyes, searching the memory. "She said something once, whispered it when she thought no one could hear." Then her eyes opened. Grace. That night, Emily stood by Noah's crib, whispering the name. Grace. Richard stepped in behind her. She's not yours to carry, he said gently. Emily looked back. She might be. Elliot hadn't shown his face in weeks, but his silence was louder than a threat. Richard kept a folder on his desk now, thick with legal updates, photos, names, timestamps. At the top was the image of Elliot sitting across from Lena at that restaurant. Emily stared at it again. Have you spoken to him? No, Richard said. Not since he asked about my will last Thanksgiving. She traced the corner of the picture with her thumb. Do you think he knew what she was doing? I think he paid for what he didn't want to know. They sat in silence. Then Emily asked, would he ever hurt a child? Richard didn't answer, but his jaw clenched. The next morning the lawyer called. A second shelter, 2 states away, had a matching baby intake from 3 months ago. No ID. Dropped off by a woman using the name Claire Benson. Same height, same build as Lena. Disappeared the next day. And the baby? Still in temporary foster care. Emily closed her eyes. Her name is Grace. Some people break chains with lawyers, some with truth, and some with love so fierce it makes room for one more. The foster home was 3 hours away. Flat roads, dusty skies, cornfields blurring by like yesterday's mistakes. Emily hadn't packed much, just a blanket Noah had outgrown, and a stuffed bunny she couldn't explain why she'd brought. They pulled into the driveway of a small white house with a crooked swing in the front yard. A woman opened the door, mid-50s, kind face, tired eyes, the kind of tired that comes from giving too much of your heart to children who never stay. You must be Emily, she said. I'm Beth. Inside, the walls were soft yellow. Photos of other babies lined the mantel, some smiling, some blank-eyed, all of them once left behind. She's sleeping, Beth said. But you can go in. Emily stepped quietly into the nursery. There, in a crib by the window, was a baby, tiny, dark curls, thumb tucked in her mouth. And for a moment, time stood still. She didn't cry. She didn't stir. She just breathed. Emily knelt beside the crib. Grace, she whispered. And the baby blinked once, then turned her head toward the voice like it was something she'd been waiting for. Back at the car, Richard sat with the engine off, hands gripping the wheel. Emily returned with eyes full of silence. She doesn't have anyone, she said softly. No papers, no story, just an intake date and a blanket. He nodded, waited. I want to bring her home, she said. Not because I have room, but because she was never given a name that meant stay. He didn't argue. He just turned the key. They cleared the guest room, repainted the walls. Emily folded Grace's clothes with the same care she'd once folded Noah's. Only now, her hands were steadier. Richard watched from the hallway. You look like you've done this before, he said. She smiled. I have. And then she paused. But this time, I'm not alone. Noah adjusted faster than they expected. He reached for Grace with a gummy grin, offered her his pacifier, touched her hair like it was something soft from a dream. And Grace, she didn't cry. She watched, waited, leaned into Emily's chest like she'd found a heartbeat she knew. One night, long after both babies were asleep, Emily walked onto the porch. Richard followed with 2 mugs of tea. Do you think I'm crazy? She asked. For bringing another child into this mess? He shook his head. No, he said. I think you're the reason this house finally feels full. She looked at the stars. I never thought I'd be this person, she whispered. And Richard, watching her in the soft porch light, said, You were always this person. You just didn't have your cradle yet. But not every silence means peace, because the next morning the front gate buzzed, and through the camera, Richard saw Elliot. Alone, smiling, with something in his hand. Sometimes the final storm doesn't come with thunder. It comes with a handshake. Elliot stood on the front porch with a calm that made Emily's bones ache. He held a thick envelope in one hand, the other tucked neatly in his coat pocket. Not a wrinkle out of place, not a tremble in his voice. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. Richard didn't answer. He stood between Elliot and the door, arms folded, eyes steady. Elliot held out the envelope. I came to drop this off, that's all. What is it? Richard asked. Elliot tilted his head. Everything I took. Inside the envelope were documents, signed confessions, bank transfers, affidavits from Lena, a letter she'd written before fleeing the country. I did what I was paid to do. I didn't ask questions. I regret it now. And at the bottom, a transfer of guardianship. Lena had relinquished any claim, and Elliot had signed a full statement of complicity. It was all there. Neat, clean, final. I was going to fight it, Elliot said, still calm. But then I saw a photo. Someone leaked it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a printed image. Emily holding Noah, Richard beside her, and Grace asleep on her chest. You looked like a family, Elliot said. And I realized I've never had that. Never will. He stepped back. You win, cousin. Then he turned and left just like that. That evening the house was filled with light. Not loud, not grand, just warm. 2 babies asleep, 2 adults on the porch, 2 hearts that had lived enough silence to know how to sit in peace. Emily leaned her head on Richard's shoulder. He's gone, she whispered. Richard nodded. But you're not, he said. She smiled. No, she whispered. I'm finally home. And that's how the story ends, my dear. Not with a wedding, not with a courtroom, not with revenge, but with 2 cradles. A baby boy who was never truly abandoned. A baby girl who was finally chosen. A woman who learned she was worthy. And a man who remembered how to hold something that needed him. Some stories don't end in fireworks. They end in a quiet house, a warm bottle, and 2 tiny heartbeats echoing through the night. Some stories don't end with marriage. They end with a cradle, and someone staying. At last, Miss Martha's soft closing words. If this story found a place in your heart, sugar, leave a little note in the comments, will you? We keep the porch light on around here. There's always room for one more soul looking for home at the second cradle.